All right, so here we go. Well, look, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking time to join us to look at the important issue of financial abuse in intimate relationships. Before we start, I will do just a quick acknowledgement of country, and then I'm going to introduce our panellists. So, Marrickville Legal Centre acknowledges the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we work. We acknowledge that this land holds structures of law which were practiced by thousands, for thousands of generations. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. All right, so now let me introduce our fantastic panellists for today. First of all, we have Jasmine Opdam from the Financial Abuse Service New South Wales with Redfern Legal Centre. Hi, Jasmine. Nice to have you here. Rachael Natoli from the Lokahi Foundation in Australia, and a big welcome to Jane Liu from the Chinese Australian Services Society, CAS. So before I move into asking our panellists a few questions, I thought I'd give you a quick introduction to the Savvy Finance e-learning modules and a bit about what kind of impact we hope that they will have in our community. So the set of 7 e-learning modules that we have developed was really inspired by members of our steering committee, many of whom work in this area, including people like Rachael and Laura from Redfern Legal Centre. And we were inspired in part by, in our design, by Dr. Nilmini Fernando's research for WIRES, which is a Victorian advocacy organisation. So her paper, When is the Right Time to Talk About Money? Financial teachable moments for women affected by family violence, was kind of a springboard for us for thinking about, well, what are the teachable moments for women when they're being affected by family violence? What are the teachable moments for financial abuse? And basically, we were looking at providing targeted information to women about financial abuse aligned to the different stages of leaving a perpetrator, because each stage raises different issues. And so basically, there are 7 modules that align with different stages, and the kind of impact that we're looking for is we're aiming, first of all, to improve, I guess, the take-up of information around financial abuse by women by providing a highly accessible form of learning, which is e-learning. It's not without its challenges, but at the end of the day, online is one of the ways in which women can get this information quickly. Now, in terms of once they've done it, what kind of impact are we looking at? We're looking at things like, we're looking for improvements in recognition of financial abuse and how it's related to coercive control, and again, in intimate and extended family relationships. We're looking to identify behaviours that control, exploit or inhibit victim survivors' financial independence. So a lot of this is about opening up the Pandora's box of financial abuse and making it more clear and obvious what the game is, what the tactics are. And we would like to see improvements in confidence in help seeking, building basic financial skills, and I guess a greater ability to anticipate some of the really bad tactics of financial abuse after separation, which is a big area and can really throw a woman's financial trajectory onto a downward path if we don't address it. So the 7 modules align with these kinds of outcomes and stages. So that's enough from me. Let's hear from our panellists. Savvy Finance has been developed as a resource for women to recognise in part the red flags And this is particularly true of the first 4 modules, the red flags for financial abuse. So like other forms of domestic violence, financial abuse disproportionately impacts women, cisgendered and trans. So women who people who identify as women as well as women. Now, Jasmine, just over to you. As a solicitor at Redfern Legal Centre's Financial Abuse Service, how does financial abuse impact the women you work with?
Thanks, Kinga. I think it's important to say upfront that financial abuse does affect a whole range of people, regardless of age, race, gender, sexual orientation, faith or class. But as you've said, we do know that women are disproportionately impacted, and particularly women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and women with disabilities, which are also 2 groups that face additional barriers in accessing support services. Because financial abuse often builds really slowly and subtly, it can manifest in very different ways. So some of the women who come to our financial abuse service need legal help because they've been left with all the financial liabilities at the end of a relationship, or they were forced to take out loans for their partner's benefit. Or often we see clients who were made the puppet director of a company that their partner was actually controlling. We do also often assist women who have high incomes and assets on paper, which can be a bit of a myth about financial abuse, that it only affects women from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Often the limitation of access to bank accounts and financial documents, or exclusion from financial decision making, can mean that women who have assets on paper actually fall through the gap a little bit and aren't able to access free legal support services. So if we look at the way financial abuse impacts the women that we work with in our financial abuse service, the impacts aren't just on victim survivors' financial and economic independence, but also on their mental and physical well-being. Recovery can take a very long time, particularly if financial abuse continues for years after the relationship. And we see this especially where victim survivors have been left with significant debts, or where there are ongoing family court proceedings, or if their credit score and their credit rating has been really badly impacted by the financial abuse behaviours. Since the start of, I was just going to say that since the start of the COVID pandemic, as with many forms of domestic violence, we've seen an increase in the frequency and severity of financial abuse. Some of the more concerning behaviours we've seen in our service during COVID have been perpetrators forcing their partners to apply for early access to their superannuation and taking those lump sums from them, or stopping victim survivors from working, from studying, and using COVID and pandemics as an excuse to withhold child support and transfer debts and liabilities and household expenses into our clients' names. The biggest problem, I think, is that with the social isolation, financial stress, loss of work and income during COVID and lockdowns, a lot of financial abuse has actually been disguised as just financial hardship. So it's been difficult for us to identify people who have been experiencing financial abuse, but also for people to safely access support services. So what we're worried about is that so far we've actually only seen the tip of the iceberg.
Well, that's concerning, isn't it? So now, Rachael and Jane, you've both contributed to the development of Savvy Finance. I've worked with you both as part of the steering committee, and in helping us to consult with migrant women, and particularly you, Jane, with women in the Chinese community who have lived experience of financial abuse and to a certain extent have come through at the other end as well. Can you, Jane, could you speak to that consultation process with the women who had experienced financial abuse?
Yes. For my part, we have assisted in recruiting our community members who are victim survivors of domestic abuse and also help to develop some scripts to make sure they are culturally appropriate to our community. However, to be honest, it is not easy to persuade our clients or even our caseworker to have to recruit the clients to make sure they attend the interview. Some of them are because of they're still during in trauma process, and they some not realize they have some mental health issue, and some because their lack of knowledge about financial abuse, they don't think they are kind of victim survivor of financial abuse, and some cultural background. Because for our program, it's mainly focused on Asian background. So like some Chinese old saying is ignorance is bliss for women, and you need to keep your domestic issue with your household. So it's a very common understanding in, I think, most of the Asian background. So it's also very difficult for us to help them to realize there's some issue here. But luckily, we are very happy that they're all very brave. And then I think it's we should applaud for them. So some of them still, have concern, but they are very happy, and we let them know that you not only help yourself, but also help the more in the community. Yeah.
Yeah, it was wonderful actually to talk with women from Jane's group, and we have tried to incorporate their insights. Now, equally important, because this is an issue that affects everyone, as we can see, across class, across ethnic background. So, Rachael, you yourself are a survivor advocate with lived experience of financial abuse. Can you tell us how your experience led you to establishing the Lokahi Foundation for victim survivors of domestic and family violence?
Yeah, thanks, Kinga. So I was in a long-term abusive relationship, which was physically, emotionally, sexually, and financially abusive. And I left about 6 years ago. And really the one thing that helped me to get out and stay out was having a caseworker that I could rely on. Somebody that was fully understanding of what the different forms of domestic abuse looked like, how coercive control was so important in keeping me in that relationship for so long, and how it made it so difficult to get out. And she was the first person I was able to build some trust with after a long time of learning to not trust people. And so after we'd finally got out and moved into our new safe home a few months later, I decided that I wanted to help other women and children by offering them that kind of support. So we started the Lakay Foundation to provide victim survivors with a caseworker that would be there for them for as long as they need it. There's no short-term turnover where we can only help them for 6 months. We are there for as long as they need, for whatever they might need. And I think because we're based in the eastern suburbs, what we often see is emotional and financial abuse. Not because there isn't physical in the eastern suburbs, there's still plenty of that, but there is a lot more emotional and financial. And the problem with that is that it's much harder to report to police because, first of all, it's not a criminal act. Until coercive control becomes a criminal act, there's really not much that the police can do to support them. And also because in the eastern suburbs and in many more affluent areas, there are just different barriers to leaving. And those barriers are often to do with the houses that they live in, the lifestyles that they lead, and their children's education. And financial abuse is one of the key barriers in that, because even when we see victim survivors taking the steps to leave, we know if you're in a physically abusive relationship, if an AVO is taken out and the police are involved, the physical abuse will generally cease. Emotional and financial abuse often don't, and especially that financial abuse. And as Jasmine said, it doesn't differentiate. But more importantly, as she said, it certainly doesn't stop when that relationship ends, and it can drag on through the family courts for years. And it becomes intertwined with systematic abuse, where victim survivors are starved of money for years and years as it's dragged out before settlements take place. Child support isn't paid when it should be. And I myself ended up becoming bankrupt while I was still in that relationship because of the financial abuse, which was then turned around on me when I left. And it was actually only with the help and support of the lawyers at Redfern Legal Centre that we were able to prove that it was financial abuse. So I think people don't realise how much impact that financial abuse can have. And it's certainly, you know, in terms of the abuse that takes, how quickly we can recover from the different forms of abuse, it sits alongside emotional abuse as something that is going to take a long time. And that's why we need to be providing that support for victim survivors long term, because it's not an overnight thing. We're not over it within a couple of months. And so you need somebody who can hold your hand as you continue to move through your process of healing.
Thank you. That's yes, what an insight. And look, at one end we have women in the eastern suburbs with large pools of asset, but no power, no agency within that. At the other end, we have women with small pools of assets also being, dispossessed of them. Things like superannuation, all right? So our modules talk about all these issues, talk about the legal tactics and the gains. So particularly our later modules, which will be coming online soon. So post-separation, very important part of the invisible thread of financial abuse there. The partner isn't there, but they're still controlling you. So thank you very much for that insight and for being, speaking about your own experience as well. All right, Rachel, look, I'm back to you again. Look, you've been a key contributor, and I know because I've worked with you, to the development of our modules. You've been very important, as well as the women in your organisation. Can you speak a bit about how we develop the content?
Look, I think, first of all, Kinga, I just want to say thanks to everybody that's been on the steering committee. It's been a great group to work with. And I think, I've played my part, but there's been lots of people and they're obviously not all speaking here today that have played really important roles in getting this from an idea up and running, yourself included. And I'm really proud to have been part of the project. So obviously we started with some pretty basic discussions about what we wanted to achieve. But what I've found to be really powerful in this is the level of consultation with lived experience. And I think it says a lot about Marrickville Legal Centre, the way that it's been run, and the fact that they've taken that on board as being so important. We need to have the skilled expertise in there. We've got to have people who can pull the program together. We've got to have people like Jasmine who have that legal background. But without having that lived expertise to be able to work out what women know, what they need to know, what they've been through themselves, it really isn't going to be a great program. And I think that's where our strength has been, is that we have really consulted with lived experience, with victim survivors, and with, especially with that CALD community through Jane, and all the hard work that she's put in to really make it a successful program. So, yeah, I think, we want to make sure that everybody is thanked for all the work that they've put in.
Thank you so much. It's true. We've had amazing women on the committee, people from Victoria, the Women's Economic Safety Group, very important group, women with a lot of insight on how this issue presents itself, and including all the lawyers here at Marrickville Legal Centre as well, and financial counsellors. So a powerful cross-discipline committee, which has given a lot to a credibility to the modules. So look, we know that financial abuse, can present in different relationships and family structures across cultures and linguistic groups. Jane, from your experience working with newly arrived migrants at CAS, can you describe how financial abuse impacts some of the women that you work with?
Yeah, thank you, Kinga. Yeah, first, also I want to repeat and emphasize what Jasmine has mentioned. Financial abuse is very important part when helping clients with domestic and family violence issue. So no matter what their ages and cultural background, so of course some ages will have more difficulty. However, when talking about people from core background, we need also realize that first they might from a totally different cultural and law background. They might never realize their financial legal rights, like our clients. A lot of people never hear about what is a financial agreement. And they all think, because I pay money for this property, so I should have legal right to live here. When you sell it, you should get, also pay back my money, or even also the some more, because it's very valuable. But it's also, bring a lot of trouble for our caseworker to help them to collect the evidence. The bank transaction record sometimes is from overseas, so it's really difficult. And the second thing is I think I already mentioned is about the cultural element, because people from different cultural, they have different kind of knowledge and also some value from their background, and sometimes it's also impede them to ask help, because they always because the language barrier, so they get the information from their family members, from their friends, or sometimes neighbors, and something probably can help, but most of the time the information is incorrect, and to make make things worse. So we are very encouraging them to use the legal, like law access, or find the cultural appropriate caseworker, so that they can get help as soon as possible. And last, I want to also to probably remind the caseworker, if you work with some clients from core background, because the language barrier is always we should aware of. We all know there's a lot of issue in interpret lines, but we never know how difficult. If you have ever helped migrant women to make the phone call, you can know waiting for 50 1 or 2 hours to waiting for the link to home, or call the law access. So it's very difficult for them to link with the mainstream service. So that's why it's also difficult for us when we make a referral out. They always come back again and again. So we should be more patient, and also try to sit with them to discuss what's the main concern for them. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And this sort of reinforces Rachel's point, really. It's not a quick fix. It's something that requires patience and time and all the different stages. And thanks for alerting us to the need to work with interpreters, because certainly I found that just interviewing your women, Jane, that I had to really work a bit to work with the interpreters. So that's an important skill for everyone to have. So last question, this could go out to any of you. How important is it for community workers, so in other words, not the specialists, to understand the signs of financial abuse?
I'm happy to jump in there. I think to echo everything that Rachel and Jane have said, those of us who are specialists working in this area really rely on community workers being at the forefront in being that first contact for women who've experienced financial abuse and other forms of domestic violence, to identify where some more specialist advice and assistance might be needed. As we've discussed, it is so difficult even for experts to identify and sort of build a case for financial abuse. So we can't expect victim survivors in the moment to necessarily recognise what they've been experiencing, or that it has a label and that there are remedies available to them. So we rely quite heavily on domestic violence support workers, caseworkers, as well as financial counsellors and others, to recognise not necessarily the full extent of the financial abuse, but just that there might be a need to dig a little bit deeper, to look beyond things like gendered division of finances in a relationship and look beyond financial hardship and debt and actually think about what the drivers of those things are. And in our service, we work very closely with financial counsellors and caseworkers, even in our advice appointments, because that's the best way we can assist our clients, is by providing that wraparound service and making sure that we're building a holistic team around them to help them, as Rachael said, for however long it takes on their recovery journey to rebuild that financial independence.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I think on that, Jasmine, it's exactly right. It's all about the education, to know that we know domestic abuse takes many forms, but financial abuse takes many forms as well. You know, it can be that you don't have access to your bank accounts, and that's quite a severe form. That's probably a little bit easier to recognise if you can't actually go and get money out of your own account. But being told that, you know, I don't want you to go back and finish your study, or I don't want you to get a job, I'd rather you stayed at home and looked after the children. It can be so entrenched with the coercive control that it doesn't actually appear to be financial abuse. But having those different forms of education out there so that women can see all these different types of financial abuse and say, hang on a second, if my husband gives me his credit card and tells me how much I can spend on it, maybe that's not actually okay. Maybe there's something there that's a slight red flag that I need to be a bit more wary about. And I think, you know, that's where we'll start to see a real change and a real empowerment among victim survivors, that they can recognise financial abuse at those earlier stages, or start to see those red flags before it becomes a really difficult situation for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want also probably add just some one more here.
Yes,
I
good.
totally agree, Jasmine and Rachel's points, and we didn't notice, we didn't mention, but I think we all agree, because financial insecurity is at least one of the top reasons for these victim survivors. They can't, you know, leave their probably abuser immediately, because they need some saving, and they would return to their partners because the lack of financial security. So when, as a caseworker, so it's really important for us to realize, you know, as I mentioned, the cultural and sometimes the visa status, mental health issue for your clients, because like for our clients, we always need to collect this question, because if they are new migrants, if they are not identified, like can issue an AVO, which means probably they can't get any financial support from Centrelink, because they are still served the new migrants waiting period, probably 2 years, 4 years, or 10 years even. So that's why we need to always be very, you know, conscious and be careful to talking with different kind of clients. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much. All right, well, look, we've come to the end of our webinar. Are there any final comments anyone wants to make? All right, well, look, I encourage you all then to have a look at our modules. They're going to go online. They are the first 4 modules, and they'll be ready for use. And we welcome any feedback on them. And thanks again, everyone, for being part of this webinar. And for those of you who are on the steering committee, thank you again for your participation and support. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.